Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. We are in the book of Chronicles, chapter 11. Let's start in verse 1. All Israel came together to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, even while Saul was king, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord your God said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.' When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, he made a compact with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel, as the Lord had promised through Samuel." This is almost exactly word for word as it's stated in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. The writers of Chronicles, their big point is Saul's no longer king, David gets anointed. They skip a lot of the hairy details of all the politics and who did what and who reigned in the period where nobody could make the decision and how long it was and how long David was at Hebron and all that. From their perspective, 350 years later, or nearly 400 years later, that's unimportant details for what they're trying to write. Why are we in captivity? David was the good king. He was anointed. There was a process and everybody was involved, and he was appointed king. And they took it from a record they had and went on. Verse 4. David and all the Israelites marched to Jerusalem, that is Jebus. The Jebusites who lived there said to David, "You will not get in here." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, the city of David. David had said, "Whoever leads the attack on the Jebusites will become commander-in-chief." Joab, son of Zeruiah, went up first, and so he received the command. David then took up residence in the fortress, and so it is called the city of David. He built up the city around it from the supporting terraces to the surrounding wall, while Joab restored the rest of the city. And David became more and more powerful because the Lord Almighty was with him. This is almost word for word like 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 through 10. That they're borrowing from their source, which is what we call 2 Samuel. They called it Samuel. And again, the important thing here is that David got his city. He was a conquering king. He was there, put by God to make the country safe politically, to conquer the enemies around them that had been raiding them, and to establish Yahweh worship. And he did those things, and he was successful at them, and they just need to sketch it out. They don't need all the details, and the parts that are missing here are some of the extraneous details. They're just trying to get the big picture. They're not concerned about the intricacies of what it took too much. Another one of the things we talked about several weeks ago is normally the Hebrews talked about who a man was by his name, son of, and his father. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and honestly, it's only been very recently it really struck me Zariah is not a man's name in Hebrew. It is a woman's name. Zariah was one of David's sisters. So he has a nephew that is become king. Now, it's an older sister, so Joab may not be all that much younger than David, but, Zariah was a relative, and it was a sister. So Joab was a relative of David. He's keeping it in the family so far. A lot of the politics that's going to go on is going to be within the clan that David was a member of, just like the rest of the people at the time. Saul had kept the royal family in the clan. It was part of the clan business to be royalty. David likewise is keeping the running of the government, and the most important part of the government, because he's to be that conquering king, is the army. And so after he conquers his fortress, the city of David, which is a part of Jerusalem, he builds up the defensive fortifications, and Joab, his commander, gets to build up the city of Jerusalem and its walls. And the implication is that they're both getting wealthy in the process. Sure, they conscripted people, but a lot of what they needed was expert work at the time, and so they hired them, and they would have hired them from Israelites, and people would have, contributed their taxes gladly to have the government build a fortified city. But now you have more valuable real estate, and guess what? That real estate was now owned by Joab. And so he gets to develop the inside of that city and sell land and build houses and sell houses. And, he's not doing it personally, probably. He's hiring people to get it done for him. And he's probably giving favors. You want to work for the government? Fine. I have a need to sell you a house so you can live in the city to do business with us. Pay me the fees. And so David is building up the military and the military fortification and becoming very kingly. And he's not building a palace per se. He's building a fortress. And he's living in a fortress. Joab, even though he's the general of the army, is building the city. And he's referred to like his mother is a man. She's not. She's David's sister. And so his dad, we don't know where he was. He was a foreigner. She married a foreigner. And consequently, either he had joined the clan and become Israelite, or they had parted ways and she'd come back home and raised her sons in the clan. And we actually have nothing on, we have his name. We got that in the genealogy. But we really do not know anything about their family life. So either their dad was a Yahweh worshiper and probably been circumcised and become accepted as a Jew, but his country of origin is just attached to him for the rest of his life. Or she's come home and the clan is raising her boys. And so David's as much a father to them as anybody else. And so David and Joab become quite close. Battle buddies tend to do that way. But from their perspective in the captivity, a lot of that's unimportant. It's unimportant how Joab got there, his ancestry. He's accepted. That he was an important Israelite and important in the royal family is all that's really important. And that Jerusalem started because they captured it. Verse 10, then we get to the list of David's mighty men. They were called the 30 mighty men. Originally, when you read Samuel, this is the first 30 people that come follow David when he's escaping Saul, and they are basically vagabonds and people who are somehow not acceptable to their clan, to civil society, and are not acceptable to Saul and his administration, something like that. The list of names changes. They're not named as individuals when David's running around trying to keep himself and his men alive. In Samuel, there's a list of them, and part of what I'm going to do after I read that list is compare and contrast the list. We're not going to go name by name comparison because that just takes way too much time and doesn't get the gist of it. But as I read this list, understand this one is written a lot longer later than when it was done, and it names more people, and it names people that the first list does not name. The first list is in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And there it's listed toward the end of David's life, but it's actually after his farewell address before he dies, and the story of how he dies comes after that. So it's kind of a bookend to his life written there. But comparing and contrasting, it was probably recorded from an early list that was early in his kingship. After the kingdom got established and his military hierarchy became stable, and these men that were listed were the military hierarchy. But it didn't get put into the time ordered list because that was not important to them. And so they just put it in afterwards to say, hey, here's his important men. It had been written down well before then. But apparently the people on the list of 30 important military men changes with time. And in the Babylonian captivity, when they decide to record it, they look at the list that was in Samuel. They look at the list that was in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, which would have listed probably, every year or every 5 years or whatever, whenever there was a change. Hey, this person died, this person got added. This person did more valiant things and they got promoted, and this other person that used to be on the list now has been demoted. And then they added these other names that were known to them but not known are not thought of as important enough to record while David was still alive or shortly after his death. They added them because every one of them is important to the history of the country. And if you were descended from one of these people, you had some cachet to your name. Just like anybody here in the United States that's, say, a descendant of President Jefferson is important. Hey, the writer of the documents of this country, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, he's an important man. If you're his descendant, you've got some cachet to your name. You may not be any more important than a descendant that came in on a boat and got dumped in Boston Harbor the same day that the country won its independence and peace was established. And, the first generation, they barely made a living, scrounging around. But, generations later, they may be an important person. But these mighty men, because of who they were and who they helped and who they supported politically, they're important. And anybody that's their descendant can go back and point, hey, my ancestor was. So let's read. I'm going to start in verse 10. I'm probably going to stop in verse 25 and talk about that part of the list, and then we'll read the rest of the list. These were the chiefs of David's mighty men. They, together with all Israel, gave his kingship strong support to extend it over the whole land, as the Lord had promised. This is the list of David's mighty men. Jashubin, a Hekamonite, was chief of the officers. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Dodai, the Ahahite, one of the three mighty men. He was with David at Pas-Dammim when the Philistines gathered there for battle. At a place where there was a field full of barley, the troops fled from the Philistines, but they took their stand in the middle of the field. They defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. 3 of the 30 chiefs came down to David to the rock at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. "God forbid that I should do this," he said. "Should I drink the blood of these men who went to the risk of their lives?" Because they risked their lives to bring it back, David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty men. Abishai, the brother of Joab, was chief of the 3. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed, and so he became as famous as the 3. He was doubly honored above the 3. Excuse me. And became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, was a valiant fighter from Kabzeel who performed great exploits. He struck down 2 of Moab's best men. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down an Egyptian who was 7.5 feet tall. Although the Egyptian had a spear like a weaver's rod in his hand, Benaniah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaniah, son of Jehoiada. He, too, was as famous as the three mighty men. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30, but he was not included among the three. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. Now, these vignettes and these names and these people were in 2 Samuel chapter 23 also. There are certain things we note about them, though. The first man mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 23, is in verse 8, was called Josiah Eb Bushabeth, a Tekoanite. And the exploit he did where he killed a bunch of men all at once, it said he killed 800 men instead of 300. 300 is the number that Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, killed, and apparently through the centuries those two numbers got conflated. And let's face it, 800 men in hand-to-hand combat in one battle, well, even 300 is an unbelievably large number. 800 is just an extravagant number. If you think that they probably had about a 12-hour daylight period to do battle, 800 men in 12 hours is, they're lined up and he's just going whack, 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 whack. And that's not how wars are fought anywhere. Even then, if there had been 800 men, they would have all attacked him at once, and it's very unlikely that he could have survived that encounter. If they, I can't imagine warriors in hand-to-hand combat days that would be so dumb they all run at him one at a time and let him kill man after man after man. If nothing else, somebody would go, "Hey, wait up, buddy. He's getting tired. Let's get 2 or 3 of us and just overwhelm him." 300 is still an amazing amount. And I think the historians that wrote the Chronicles go, 800 is unreasonable. Let's say he did 300 and go on. We can trust that number. There are other minor points, like when the Eleazar, son of Dodai, the Ahohite, his exploit. In 2 Samuel, it says he took a stand in the middle of a field of barley and struck the Philistines down, and the Israelites came back to strip the bodies and to share the victory. It indicates in 2 Chronicles, David was standing back to back with him, and the two of them defended the field, and the Israelites came back. Didn't mention the Israelites only came back to strip the bodies. Just the Lord provided a great victory. Now, it does make more sense that 2 men would stand back to back and defend each other. And I could see 2 men that were brave and valiant and strong and good fighters taking a stand and defending each other and achieving a great victory together. It's a whole lot more believable than, a single man by himself killing 300 people or whatever. Now, it would probably not that great a number, or they would have recorded the number. The implication, this is in a time when armies are transitioning from a huge standing armies, a few hundred people, to a huge standing armies for several tens of thousands of people in the Middle East. And so if they had found a raiding band of 12 men and had to stand their ground and kill them all, that would have still been a great victory because it's a major significant portion of their army. The Philistines were a loose confederation of city-states, but they fought wars together. To the south, they had Egypt. To the north, they had what used to be their colony, Israel, and now is a fierce and independent nation, and they want their colony back, and they know there's no way they're going to go down and attack Egypt. And they're pinned in between the sea, the desert, and these two great powers. And so they're going to stand together despite their internal politics against all foreign invaders. So, even if they don't have a great standing army at the time, they're going to stand together. So, even killing a few dozen people would be a great slaughter in that standing army. There's also some differences in names. The differences probably come down to how did the pronunciations of those names change through the centuries. I mentioned the first name in the list in 2 Samuel. It was Josiah Bushabeth. Jashobim is what he's called in Chronicles. So that's probably just a difference in how the name is pronounced. A lot of English names, if you look back in Middle English or Old English, there's the same name, but we pronounce it different. We spell it much different. And a historian might well, if they were using that name, not use the historical name, but update it to the current version of the name. And that's apparently what they've done here for him. And we're going to see that in the list of the rest of the 30 mighty men. So they've largely borrowed from 2 Samuel 23. They have made some editorial changes, and particularly pronunciation names, spelling of the names, it seems to be the biggest change. This is the only area where there's exploits, and when they do that, they have taken some of the details out that they don't think are that important. It's much the same, though. Let's start in verse 26. The mighty men were Ashiel, the brother of Joab, Elihanan, the son of Dodo from Bethlehem, Shemamoth the Hararite, Helez the Pelonite, Ira son of Ikesh from Tekoa, Ebiezer, from Anathoth, Sibekiah the Hushathite, Eliah the Ahohite, Mahari the Netophathite, Helad son of Banah the Netophathite, Ithai son of Rebai from Gibeah in Benjamin, Benaniah the Parathonite, Hurai from the ravines of Gaash, Abiel the Arbathite, Asmavaeth the Baharumite, Eliahaba the Shaalabonite, the sons of Hashem the Gizonite, Jonathan the son of Shagi the Hararite, Ahiam son of Sakar the Hararite, Eliphel the son of Hefer the Mekerathite, Ahijah the Pelonite, Hezro the Carmelite, Naarai the son of Isbai, Joel the brother of Nathan, Mibhar the son of Hagari, Zilek the Ammonite, Naharai the Behathite, the armor-bearer of Joab son of Zariah, Ira the Ithrite, Gareb the Ithrite, Uriah the Hittite, Zebad the son of Alai, Adina the son of Shimzi the Reubenite, who is chief of the Reubenites, and the 30 with him, Hanan son of Makkah, Josaphat the Mithonite, Uzziah the Ashtrathite, Shammah and Jeiel the sons of Hotham the Ararite, Jediel the son of Shimri, his brother Joha the Tizite, Eliel the Mahavite, Jeribaal, and Joshuviah, the sons of Elnaam, Ithma the Moabite, Eliel, Obed, and Jaasiel the Mizrahite. If the name had an "ite" at the end, that was saying that's what clan they came from. They're identified by clan. So they're identifying who these 30 important men were, and I'm here 30 when I say it there in quotes. It's a title for the whole group. It's not a numbering of the group. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But they're important men, probably leaders in their clans, leaders of military men. They're in charge of recruitment. They're probably in charge of collecting taxes for the king after he sets up an administration, making sure there's justice in the land. They are the court that comes in and helps him decide cases. So there's more to this than just they're strong military men. Even though that's where they get their start, and under David, that's where they get into the government from, they become leaders of civil society as well. Now, let's look at 2 Samuel 23 versus 1 Chronicles 11 for this list of men and look at the differences. In 2 Samuel, there's 29 named men with 2 lines that only list who the father was, and it ends with 37 in all. And the last one in that list is Uriah the Hittite. In 1 Chronicles, there's 46 named men. By the way, in 2 Samuel, the first line that just said the sons of, it was the sons of Jason. at that same line in 2 Chronicles, it says the sons of Hashem the Gizonite. And all the names above it and the names right below it, before the next line that we're going to talk about, are the same, except occasionally there's some slight differences in pronunciation, which if I read the two of them together, you'd kind of roll your eyes and go, yeah, that's the kind of change in pronunciation you get in names across centuries. You would probably recognize it as the same name if I read them together and go, well, they're at least similar names. The name Jason versus Hashan, the difference there is how did they pronounce the letter that we translate into J or H. And honestly, early in Hebrew, it was sometimes pronounced more like a Y, sometimes more like a J, and sometimes more like an H. And as it developed, they developed a system where you could tell which way they were going to pronounce it, and the names separated, and you would have somebody that it was very clear whether it was a J or an H or a Y sound. And I think what's going on early on, the difference in pronunciation was indistinct. That they would be used interchangeably. And it got written down, and the exact form of that letter that they wrote down and the font they were using at that time eventually got associated with a different part of that pronunciation as the three consonant sounds became distinct in the language. And so the name may have drifted in that way. And so also the S versus sh, the sibilants of S and sh became distinct. Early on in Hebrew, they were interchangeable. And in fact, in the time of the judges, there was a civil war in Israel. And one side took advantage of the pronunciation of S versus sh in a word to identify, capture, and kill a large part of the opposing army as they were trying to run back home. And, we dealt with that when we dealt with judges. And so the change of one sibilant to another, which is the letters that form S-type sounds, S and sh and z are all sibilants. The sibilant shifting a little bit doesn't faze me either. So you say Jashem versus Hashan. That sounds different to us as English speakers, and we spell them vastly different. But to the Jewish speaker, those would have been very similar names, and they might well, if they pronounced it in the old way versus the new way, said, yeah, they're spelled the same way. Then the next list that in Samuel said the son of was the son of Hagri. In 1 Chronicles, it says Mibhar, the son of Hagri. And the Jews, the Israelites, they wrote Hebrew with only consonants. They didn't put any vowels in. Once they did start putting vowels in, it's actually after They've been in Rome for centuries. It's after Christ. It's beginning of the Middle Ages. And they're beginning to lose how do you pronounce these words. As long as you're native speakers, it's actually very easy to guess which vowels should go there. But when you're learning it from non-native speakers and you learn all these other languages too, it becomes hard to figure out what vowels go places. And so the people who knew what they were started putting in small little marks that we call vowel pointing. And a lot of them are little more than dots or apostrophes or commas or dashes or something like that. And they're very much smaller than the consonants. And they basically went into old manuscripts and added these vowel pointings into all the words so that students that didn't understand could read them correctly. And then they started copying that, and modern Hebrew has turned those vowel pointings into full letters and leaves them space just like anything else. And I mention all that to say Mibhar was a very small Hebrew word. 2 letters. And they're very small letters. And so it would be easy to see a condition where a smudge got on a document and the copyist didn't realize that as he went and copied it over, that a mistake had been made in smudging or marking out the word, and he just wrote down the son of Hagri and copied it without a word, and then the next copyist would not even know, and so it became the tradition. There wasn't a name, it was just the son of the father. Apparently in Chronicles, they had other records and go, wait, that guy got left out. Let's put his name down here. So we now know his name because the people that wrote Chronicles wrote it down for us. And down to Uriah the Hittite, we have essentially the same list. There are places where the clan name is the same and the name up front is different. Most of those, the father's name was the same. So the father stayed the same, the clan name stayed the same, and the name of the son changed. We don't know whether that was a case of there was more than one son, both of them made the 30 mighty men, or if that was the same man, he had 2 names, and one list lists one of his names and the other list lists the other name. That's a possibility. But it's essentially the same men up to Uriah the Hittite. In Chronicles, then, 16 other names are listed after Uriah the Hittite, and there is no sum at the end. If you look at those, you would say that, if you look at Samuel, you're going to say, well, then Jason, as he's pronounced there, has 7 sons, because there's 29 named men, there's the son of Hagri, and then the sons of Jasim. And if you say that, then, and there's 37 total, then there's 30 men accounted for other than the sons of Jasim. So he had 7 sons. If you count up the men in 1 Chronicles, there's 16 after Uriah the Hittite. There are 30 named men from Uriah the Hittite up the list to the top of the list, and the sons of Hashem the Gizonite are 0. Or, well, there's no sum, so you can't really determine. But there's 46 named people, and his number of sons are indeterminate. Apparently, there was, I'm going to interpret this, there's 7 sons, and all of them rotated in and out of David's important men. Probably a lot of them lost their lives in battle, or maybe all of them. And David did not bother recording which of the sons. It's the dad that was important to him, and he was keeping that clan involved in his command structure. And so the individuals weren't important. It's who they were the son of that was important. Every one of the other men was important for who they were and what they did. Most of these are Israelites. And we can go through the genealogy that was given in the first 9 chapters of Chronicles. Go identify what tribe they were, what the clan was, who their associations were. But there's some of them, like Uriah the Hittite, they're clearly not Israelites. Well, he's identified as Hittite. What was he doing as an important man in what is a very clear to be Israelite fighting force, guiding Israel? Well, the easiest thing to interpret that is David won their hearts and their minds, and they started worshiping Yahweh, and they became a proselyte to Judaism, the religion, in a day when it wasn't that big a deal to convert. And they followed David around. They may have been rejects from their own country, and David took them in, and so they adopted his God. We don't know any details about that. But since David was devout to God, a man after his own heart, and we have to conclude they worshiped Yahweh, at least as lip service worship, probably more seriously than that. Let's face it, having a circumcision as an adult man is a lot more commitment than just, what temple do I go to and which priest do I pay my tithe to? Tithing was common in the Middle East, and priest in the temple, that was typical. So, if you lightly held to any worship, the details of worship, you adopt the details of their culture and you do it their way if you're going to live among these people. That their ancestry, like Uriah, he's a Hittite, sticks with them the rest of their life, even though they're accepted as a Yahweh worshiper, and therefore under the Israelite banner, and even a leader of the people, is just kind of one of those remarkable things. The Israelites could say, yes, we have, Hittites and Ammonites and Moabites, and I'm missing some of the others right now. I think there's like 6 different foreign countries in there. But it's important that they accepted these people when they started worshiping Yahweh. And I think part of that is David himself was accepting, if you're going to worship Yahweh, we're going to accept you. The Mosaic law said, even to, the 10th generation, you can't let them in the tabernacle. But David's great-grandmother was Ruth the Moabitess. His son, 5th generation, is going to build the temple. David was probably a little more lenient in his interpretation. If you're going to live among us 10 generations and you still don't convert, then we're still not letting you in the temple, in the tabernacle. On the other hand, to convert, you become one of us, we're going to let you worship. We want you to worship our God. And I think that's the way David interprets that. And I think, therefore, when we see these men that have a foreign last name and a foreign association in place of their clan association, what you're seeing is you're seeing a man or a group of people that have adopted Yahweh as God, and David is making connection with that community. And Uriah the Hittite was probably the leader of the Hittites that were Israelites. And, the one that's the Moabite, Ithmoth the Moabite, he's probably a leader of the Moabites that are in Israel that worship Yahweh. Now, David probably would have kicked the Moabites that don't worship Yahweh out and go, unless you're a diplomat, unless you're a diplomat from Moab, get packing. You don't belong here. And so the Moabites need to live in their own country. And so you have this list in Chronicles that's more complete. It lists people, and it lists more foreigners. And why would that be important to people who want to be pure in their ancestry and make sure you're really an Israelite and not a faker? Well, I think what they're trying to say is these people became Israelites and put their strengths in with Israel and worshiped Yahweh and became Israelites because they worshiped Yahweh. And they're also trying to defend this concept that's just introduced in the last 2-3 generations, that if you quit worshiping Yahweh, you're no longer an Israelite. So they're saying, hey, this Hittite, Uriah, worshipped Yahweh, and now he's an Israelite. He's willing to take circumcision and go to the tabernacle and worship the way Moses told us to, so he's an Israelite, even though his ancestry isn't Israelite. And they're trying to say your ancestry isn't what makes you Jewish, so to speak, Israelite. It's who you worship. They're trying to come back and say, yes, we want all our children to worship Yahweh, and if not, we're going to kick them out of the family and disown them and pretend they're dead. They're now just a stranger in the community that we may happen to do business with, but they also quit being Israelite when they quit worshiping Yahweh. But if somebody outside the community decides to worship Yahweh, they become an Israelite, even though they have no ancestry that goes back to Jacob. And I think that's part of what they're trying to say here. Rabbis were going to argue about that off and on, honestly, into the late Middle Ages. And I think the Jews today have tried to settle on you've got to have ancestry from Jewish lines that go back to before the Roman conquest of Jerusalem. And get mentioned in the book. Your ancestor gets mentioned in the book of Chronicles. Is where they're basically going today. But they also have abandoned worshiping Yahweh. When the last time the debate was going strong, there was a group that said, basically, you gotta both have genetic ancestry back to Israel and worship Yahweh. There was a group at the other end that was like, whatever, if you want to be one of us, you're part of us. Worship whatever God you want to. Both of those were actually kind of minor positions. And the two major positions were you have to have genetic ancestry back to Jacob, or you have to worship Yahweh. And nobody but ancestor Jacob would want to do that. But if somebody from the outside comes in and accepts all the laws of Moses, then, they're an Israelite. The Jews for several centuries, at least on the outside, kept worshiping Yahweh well. Now, that said, very often their worship of Yahweh was more superficial, skin deep, and not based on a deep abiding faith. This is, in one sense, though, yes, it's listed as part of David's administration, and that's what it was, but it's also a list of genealogy that if you know your genealogy back to one of these people, you're automatically accepted as Israelite because your ancestor was one of David's 30 mighty men. Never mind, the list is 46 people long, plus the sons of Hashem. However many that was. I'm glad that we no longer have to know our genealogy to be able to worship Yahweh. He accepts anybody. Jesus forgave us of all sin, and we therefore, if we put our trust and faith in Him, we're accepted by God. We don't have to have a certain genetics, a certain lineage. We don't have to trace it through our father and grandfather and great-grandfather. It doesn't even have to be our mothers. Like Zariah and her sons, Joab, Ishiel, and I think it was a Hophel, but I'm losing his name right now. The three brothers. Anyway, sons of Zariah. And the Jews in the Middle Age realized a logical conundrum. You couldn't prove, you only had to take the testimony of the woman who got her pregnant, but you couldn't prove she was the father, who the father was. So in the Middle Ages, the Jews switched from being male dominant to female dominant, and who was your mother? And if your mother was Jewish, you were Jewish. And unless you claimed the ethnicity of your father, you were Jewish. Even if she accepted and married somebody else. And they then also preferred if he accepted Judaism. If he did, they were quite willing to give him a Jewish wife and, become you're part of the community. Christ's coming actually messed things up in that tear and division between Judaism and Christianity as they separated. They had to go back to what they were doing here in Chronicles in the Babylonian captivity and redefine who's in and who's out. And if you're out, you're counted as dead and no longer Jewish. And that kind of messed up this thought that the chroniclers were trying to get out, that if you worshipped Yahweh, you were Jewish, you were Israelite, you were Hebrew. If you didn't worship Yahweh, then you weren't. Didn't matter who your ancestry was. Well, excluding the Christians from Judaism, which didn't really happen until about 100 AD for most of the Roman Empire, or a little later even. Some people put the date as late as 125 AD, meant that suddenly people that they recognized that their blood relatives were no longer Jewish, even though they claimed they worshipped Yahweh. And so then they went back to a very strict, you've got to have absolute lineage back to one of these people that's in Chronicles and worship Yahweh. And then after some other dust-ups through history, we've got the current mess we have where they no longer believe in their God. And that's a sad state. Holy Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for sending your very own Son to redeem us. But thank you for also pointing out that it's worship you that's more important than who our ancestry is. Who my father is, who my grandfather is, who my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is not as important as my relationship to you. And your relationship to me, because you loved me first, even when I did not know of you, even when my ancestors did not know of you. You broke into history and sent your very own Son to be that atoning sacrifice for us, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. And you separated the difference, the distance between yourself and us, and you called us to be yours. And because you loved us, we can love you and other people too. Thank you for that. Lord, I ask that you continue to bless us at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, that we would do your will, that we would tell others about you, we would lift you high, that you could draw all men to yourself. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, and this has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, February 12th, 2025, and this was recorded on Sunday, February 9th, 2025. It's been an exhausting weekend for me. I haven't really rested. You can hear my voice is a little rough. Had Annette's funeral yesterday. It was a great service. We worshiped God. I'll just put it that way. I think Annette would have thoroughly approved. We had worship service today. It's also that time of year when it's time to garden, and I'm behind on my walking because of weather and not feeling good, and it's just been a rough weekend. Pray for me. I pray for you. And I hope to see you there Wednesday. I liked what Oscar has done with his sermon series, and he ended it today on a high note. I like that. I look forward to his next sermon series. You should come and hear it in person. If I don't see you Wednesday, I hope to see you Sunday in church. And if nothing else, we'll see you here on YouTube. You have a blessed day.